Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Evan Dudley stood in his corner office on the 32nd floor, watching the Seattle skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. At 38, he had everything a man could want. A thriving security consulting firm built from his military expertise, a beautiful wife, and a 7-year-old son who was the light of his life. His reflection in the glass showed a man who'd maintained his military bearing, broad shoulders, steel gray eyes, and the kind of quiet confidence that came from surviving 3 tours in Afghanistan as a special forces strategist. "Mr. Dudley?" His assistant knocked on the door. "Your wife called. Isaac's appointment is at 3. Evan smiled, thinking of his son's routine checkup. Isaac had been fighting a persistent cough, and Celia insisted they get blood work done to rule out any underlying issues. "Thanks, Sarah. I'll head out now." The drive to Seattle Children's Hospital gave him time to reflect on how far he'd come. After leaving the Army 5 years ago, he'd channeled his strategic mind into building Dudley Security Solutions, specializing in corporate risk assessment and protection services. His military contacts and analytical skills had made him wealthy, allowing Celia to pursue her art career without financial pressure. Isaac bounded into his arms the moment he walked into the pediatric wing. "Dad, Mom said we might get ice cream after." "Did she now?" Evan ruffled his son's dark hair, so similar to his own. "We'll see how brave you are with the needles first." Celia Humphrey Dudley smiled from her chair, her blonde hair perfect despite spending the morning in her studio. At 34, she remained stunning, the kind of beauty that had stopped Evan cold when they'd met at a gallery opening 8 years ago. "He's been talking about you coming all morning." The blood draw went smoothly, Isaac earning his promised ice cream with stoic bravery that made Evan's chest swell with pride. They were laughing over Sundays when Evan's phone buzzed with a text from his business partner, Vernon Hoover, his old Army buddy who handled the technical side of their business. "Emergency client meeting moved to tomorrow. You're free for the evening, brother. Looks like I can actually make dinner tonight," Evan announced, earning cheers from Isaac and a smile from Celia that seemed oddly strained. That evening, as they sat around their dining table in their Capitol Hill home, Evan felt the deep satisfaction of a life well built. Isaac chattered about school, Celia discussed her latest commission, and Evan shared sanitized stories from his corporate world. This was what he'd fought for overseas, the American dream made real. If only he'd known that by tomorrow, it would all be revealed as an elaborate lie. Chapter 2. The Revelation. The call came at 10 a.m. the next morning while Evan was reviewing security protocols for a pharmaceutical client. The pediatrician's office wanted them to come in immediately to discuss Isaac's blood work results. "It's probably nothing," Celia said over the phone, but Evan caught the tremor in her voice. "You know how doctors are with abnormal readings." They met at the hospital, Isaac staying with Celia's mother. The pediatrician, Dr. Wesley Hopkins, seemed unusually tense as he led them to his office. "I need to discuss something sensitive," Dr. Hopkins began, his hands fidgeting with Isaac's file. "During our routine panel, we ran some genetic markers as part of a new protocol for hereditary disease screening. The results were unexpected." Evan leaned forward. "What kind of unexpected?" "The paternity markers show that Isaac isn't biologically related to you, Mr. Dudley." The words hit Evan like a sniper's bullet, clean, precise, devastating. He felt his military training kick in, his face becoming an emotionless mask even as his world tilted off its axis. "That's impossible," Celia whispered, her face draining of color. "There must be a mistake." Dr. Hopkins pulled out a lab report, his hands shaking slightly. "I've never seen results this clear-cut. The probability of paternity is less than 0.01%. I've already called the lab to verify. They've run it 3 times. Evan stared at the numbers that destroyed his life. Years of intelligence analysis had taught him to read data objectively, and this data was unambiguous. Isaac, his son, his pride, his legacy, wasn't his. The nurse who had drawn Isaac's blood yesterday appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Doctor, I need to speak with you urgently." Dr. Hopkins excused himself, leaving Evan and Celia alone. The silence stretched between them like a battlefield. When Evan finally looked at his wife, he saw something he'd never noticed before: fear. Not confusion or shock, but the specific fear of someone whose carefully constructed lie was crumbling. "How long?" His voice was deadly quiet. "Evan, I don't understand what." "How long?" Each word was a measured beat. The nurse returned with Dr. Hopkins, whispering urgently in his ear. The doctor's face went ashen. "I'm sorry, but I need to call security," Dr. Hopkins said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Dudley, I'm afraid you cannot leave this room until we sort this out." "What's wrong?" Evan demanded, his strategic mind racing through possibilities. "It's not my place to say. This is impossible." Dr. Hopkins showed Evan the paternity report again, but this time Evan noticed additional markers highlighted in yellow. Genetic markers that told a story beyond simple paternity. The truth hit him like a flashbang grenade. The man who had fathered Isaac wasn't just anyone. The genetic markers suggested it was someone Evan knew. Someone whose DNA was already in the system for reasons that would explain the nurse's terror and the doctor's panic. Without a word, Evan stood and walked out of the room, ignoring the calls behind him. He needed air. He needed space. He needed to think. But first, he needed to get his son. Chapter 3. The investigation begins. Evan sat in his truck outside Isaac's school, watching children pour out of the building like his own son had done thousands of times before. But everything was different now. Every memory was potentially a lie. Every milestone possibly built on deception. Isaac ran to the truck with his usual enthusiasm, backpack bouncing. "Dad, you're early. Thought we'd grab a burger," Evan said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his head. "Just us guys." Over burgers and fries, Evan studied his son's face with new eyes. The dark hair he'd attributed to his own genetics, the bright smile, the quick wit. How much was nature? How much was nurture? Did biology even matter when this boy had been his whole world for 7 years? "Dad, are you okay? You look sad." Evan reached across the table and squeezed Isaac's small hand. "I'm fine, buddy. Just thinking about work stuff." That evening, after Isaac was asleep, Evan retreated to his home office and did what he did best. He gathered intelligence. The genetic markers from the hospital had triggered something in his memory, and years of military investigation training kicked in. He started with Celia's phone records, easily accessed through their shared account. What he found made his blood run cold. For the past 8 years, there had been regular contact with a number registered to Lorenzo Page, a name that sent ice through Evan's veins. Lorenzo Page. Captain Lorenzo Page, to be exact. A man Evan knew from his military days, though they'd never been friends. Page had been court-martialed for sexual assault and conduct unbecoming an officer 3 years ago, but the charges had been dropped on a technicality. He'd been quietly discharged and had disappeared from Evan's radar. Until now, Evan pulled up Page's military records through contacts who still owed him favors. The timeline was damning. Page had been stationed at Joint Base Lewis McChord during the same period Evan had been deployed to Afghanistan. The same period when Celia would have been alone, vulnerable, and according to her own admission, struggling with the isolation of military life. But the phone records showed contacts starting even before Isaac was born. This wasn't a chance encounter or a moment of weakness. This was a sustained relationship. His phone buzzed with a text from Celia. "Where are you? We need to talk." Evan looked at the message, then at the evidence spread across his desk. 8 years of marriage, 7 years of raising another man's child, countless deployments where he'd risked his life believing he was protecting his family. All of it built on a foundation of lies. He picked up his phone and dialed Vernon Hoover. "Vernon, I need a favor. A big one. Name it, brother. I need everything you can find on Lorenzo Page. Everything." Vernon's silence stretched long enough that Evan thought the call had dropped. Finally, "Jesus, Evan. That's a name I hoped I'd never hear again. What's he done now? He destroyed my life. The question is what I'm going to do about it." By midnight, Evan had a complete dossier on Lorenzo Page's life since his discharge. The man had fallen far, struggling financially, living in a rundown apartment in Tacoma, working intermittent construction jobs. But the phone records showed he'd maintained contact with Celia throughout it all. Evan's strategic mind began formulating a plan. Page had taken everything from him: his marriage, his son, his trust, his belief in the life he'd built. The man deserved consequences that went far beyond a simple divorce. In the military, Evan had learned that the best operations were those where the enemy destroyed themselves, where their own actions became the instrument of their downfall. Lorenzo Page was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Chapter 4. Gathering Intelligence. Evan spent the next 3 days in a carefully controlled reconnaissance phase, maintaining his normal routine while systematically dismantling the facade of his marriage. His military training had taught him that emotional reactions led to tactical mistakes, so he compartmentalized his rage and hurt, channeling them into cold, methodical planning. The first breakthrough came from Vernon's deep dive into Lorenzo Page's current situation. The former Army captain was in even worse shape than the surface indicated, behind on rent, maxed out credit cards, and apparently supplementing his income through less than legal means. Vernon had traced him to an underground poker game in Tacoma where Page had been spotted 3 times in the past month. The man's desperate, Vernon reported over secure channels they'd established for their business. And desperate men make stupid decisions. Evan's investigation into Celia proved equally revealing. Using techniques learned from years of corporate surveillance work, he'd placed discreet monitoring software on her devices. What he discovered was an elaborate double life that spanned years, not months. The affair with Page hadn't been a one-time indiscretion. It was an ongoing relationship that had begun before Isaac's conception and continued throughout their marriage. Worse, Celia had been funneling money to Page from their joint accounts, small amounts she'd disguised as art supply purchases and personal expenses. But the most damning evidence came from a storage unit Celia had rented under her maiden name. Using his lockpicking skills and surveillance experience, Evan accessed it during her gallery showing. Inside, he found photographs, letters, and even gifts she'd bought for Page over the years, a shrine to the relationship she'd hidden in plain sight. One letter, written just 6 months ago, made Evan's hands shake with controlled fury. Evan's latest contract is worth $2.3 million over 3 years. Once Isaac turns 18 and I can claim half his college fund, we'll have enough to start over. Just be patient a little longer. He suspects nothing to see. The storage unit revealed another devastating truth. Celia had been documenting Evan's business dealings, his client list, and his security protocols. Information that could be sold to competitors or used for industrial espionage. She wasn't just betraying their marriage. She was betraying his livelihood and potentially endangering his clients. Evan photographed everything, meticulously cataloging evidence while his mind worked through the implications. This wasn't just adultery and paternity fraud. It was conspiracy, theft, and potentially treason given some of his government contracts. That evening, he sat across from Celia at dinner, watching her perform the role of loving wife, while knowing she was simultaneously planning his destruction. Isaac chatted about his day, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension. "How was your day, honey?" Celia asked, her smile perfectly calibrated. "Productive," Evan replied, thinking of the evidence now secured in 3 separate locations. "I'm working on a new security protocol. Very thorough." After Isaac went to bed, Celia tried to initiate physical intimacy, something that had become less frequent over the past year, now explained by her divided loyalties. Evan deflected with work stress, unable to stomach the thought of her touch. His phone buzzed with a message from Vernon. "Found something big. Page isn't just gambling. He's been selling military information to foreign contacts. FBI is building a case." Evan stared at the message, his strategic mind immediately recognizing the opportunity. Lorenzo Page was about to become a very valuable asset in multiple ways. The next morning, Evan made a call to Beatrice Marshall, a former JAG officer who now ran one of Seattle's most respected law firms. He'd worked with her on several corporate cases and trusted her discretion. "Beatrice, I need legal counsel on a sensitive family matter. Also, hypothetically, what would you need to build an airtight case for fraud, conspiracy, and theft of intellectual property?" Hypothetically? Documentation, evidence of intent, proof of damages, and witnesses. Why do I get the feeling this isn't hypothetical? Because you're an excellent lawyer. Can you meet me tomorrow? And bring your criminal law specialist. Evan spent that night in his office, mapping out a strategy that would use every resource at his disposal. Military contacts, legal experts, business connections, and his own considerable skills in psychological warfare. Celia and Lorenzo Page had spent 8 years building their conspiracy. Now Evan was going to spend the next few weeks tearing it down, piece by piece, until they destroyed themselves with their own greed and desperation. The war had begun, and they didn't even know they were already losing. Chapter 5, Setting the Trap. Beatrice Marshall's law office occupied the top floor of a downtown Seattle high-rise, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Elliott Bay. Evan arrived precisely on time, carrying a briefcase containing 8 years' worth of carefully documented evidence. "Before we begin," Beatrice said, her steel-gray hair and sharp suit giving her the appearance of someone who ate opposing counsel for breakfast, "I need to understand your objectives. Are you looking for a simple divorce, or are we talking about something more comprehensive?" "I want complete victory," Evan replied without hesitation. "I want custody of Isaac, I want my assets protected, and I want both of them to face the full legal consequences of their actions." Beatrice's colleague, criminal attorney Sergio Devine, whistled low as he reviewed the evidence. "This isn't just adultery, Evan. We're looking at fraud, conspiracy, theft of trade secrets, and potentially espionage charges if Paige sold information to foreign agents." "That's exactly what I'm counting on." Over the next 2 hours, they outlined a strategy that would unfold in carefully orchestrated phases. The key was patience, allowing Celia and Paige to continue their relationship while documenting every crime they committed. "The beauty of this approach," Beatrice explained, "is that we're not just building a divorce case. We're building a criminal case that makes any challenge to custody or asset division impossible." Evan's phone buzzed with a text from Celia, working late at the studio tonight. "Don't wait up." He showed the message to his lawyers. "She's not at the studio. Vernon's surveillance shows she's at Paige's apartment every Tuesday and Thursday evening." "Perfect," Sergio said. "Let's give them something to really conspire about." Phase 1 of Evan's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Using his legitimate business operations, he would create an opportunity for Celia and Paige to commit a major crime, one that would be impossible to deny or minimize. The next morning, Evan met with his largest client, a defense contractor working on classified projects. He'd maintained his security clearance and often consulted on their most sensitive operations. "I need to create a honeypot operation," he explained to the security director, a former Navy SEAL named Cameron Acevedo. "Someone's been attempting to access our client data, and I want to catch them in the act." "What do you need from us?" "Create a fake project file. Something that looks valuable, but is actually worthless. Something that would be irresistible to someone trying to steal information." Within hours, Cameron had generated a fictional defense contract worth $50 million, complete with fabricated technical specifications and security protocols. The file was designed to look like a legitimate classified project while containing enough inconsistencies that any expert analysis would reveal it as fake. Evan placed the file in his home office safe, ensuring that Celia would discover it during one of her information-gathering sessions. Then he waited. It took less than a week. Vernon's surveillance captured Celia photographing the contents of Evan's safe during one of his carefully orchestrated absences. The images were immediately transmitted to Paige, who made contact with his known intelligence broker within hours. "They took the bait," Vernon reported. "Paige is trying to sell classified defense information to a foreign contact. The FBI will have everything they need for espionage charges." But Evan wasn't finished. Phase 2 required Paige to make an even more devastating mistake. Through carefully placed information, Evan let it be known that his business was preparing a major acquisition that would triple its value over the next 6 months. The information was designed to reach Celia through normal social channels, making it seem like insider knowledge rather than a setup. The response was predictable. Celia's communication with Paige increased dramatically as they discussed how to position themselves to benefit from the fictional windfall. Their planning revealed the full scope of their long-term conspiracy. They'd been systematically bleeding Evan's resources for years while planning to claim half his wealth in a divorce once Isaac reached 18. "The recording from their meeting last night is devastating," Vernon reported. She outlined specific plans to manipulate custody arrangements, hide assets, and destroy evidence of their relationship. "It's conspiracy to commit fraud in the first degree." Evan listened to selected portions of the recordings, hearing his wife plan his destruction with the same casual tone she used to discuss dinner plans. Any remaining emotional attachment he felt towards Celia evaporated, replaced by the cold calculation that had made him so effective in military operations. Phase 3 would be the most dangerous and the most satisfying. Using his military contacts, Evan arranged for a joint FBI Army investigation into Paige's intelligence activities. The operation would sweep up both Paige and anyone who had assisted him, which would include Celia once the evidence of her participation was presented. The timing has to be perfect, Evan explained to his legal team. The arrests need to happen simultaneously with the divorce filing and custody petition. If either of them has time to destroy evidence or flee, we lose the advantage. Beatrice smiled with genuine admiration. I've seen corporate warfare, but this is something else entirely. You're not just winning, you're ensuring they can never recover. They spent 8 years destroying my life piece by piece, Evan replied. It seems only fair that I return the favor. The trap was set. Now all that remained was springing it. Chapter 6, The Confrontation. The text message arrived at 2:47 a.m. on a Friday morning. We need to talk. Now. Evan had been expecting it. His carefully orchestrated campaign had finally triggered Celia's survival instincts, but by now it was far too late for damage control. He found her in the kitchen, still in yesterday's clothes, her usually perfect hair disheveled and her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. You know, she said without preamble. I know a lot of things, Celia. You'll need to be more specific. She flinched at his use of her name instead of the endearments that had peppered their conversations for 8 years. About Isaac. About the paternity test. Evan poured himself coffee with steady hands, a skill learned from countless high-pressure situations where showing weakness meant death. What about it? I can explain. Can you? Evan's voice remained conversational, but something in his tone made Celia step backward. Can you explain 8 years of lies? Can you explain stealing from our accounts to support your boyfriend? Can you explain plotting to destroy the business I built while you smiled at me across the dinner table? The color drained from Celia's face. You've been spying on me. I've been protecting myself. Something I should have done years ago. Celia's expression shifted from guilt to calculation, a transformation that confirmed everything Evan had learned about her true nature. Fine. You want to play hardball? Isaac isn't your son, but he's been calling you daddy for 7 years. You think any cord is going to separate him from the only father he's ever known? I'll get half of everything, plus child support for a kid who isn't even yours. Will you? Evan asked mildly. The confidence in his voice sent visible alarm through Celia's features. She was finally beginning to understand that she might have underestimated her opponent. I've been documenting our marriage for years, she continued, but her voice lacked its earlier certainty. Every business trip you took, every time you chose work over family. I'll paint you as an absent father who cares more about military contracts than his own son. Interesting strategy. Of course, it might be difficult to argue from federal prison. Celia went completely still. What are you talking about? Lorenzo Page was arrested 3 hours ago for selling classified military information to foreign agents. Conspiracy, espionage, treason. The federal charges are quite extensive. I imagine they'll want to speak with anyone who assisted him in gathering that information. I never. The FBI has photographs of you copying files from my safe. They have recordings of you and Page planning to exploit classified information for financial gain. They have financial records showing you've been funneling money to a known intelligence broker. Evan's voice remained perfectly calm as he delivered each devastating blow. Did you really think I wouldn't notice my own wife systematically stealing from me? Celia sank into a chair, her face pale. You set us up. I gave you enough rope to hang yourselves. You chose to take it. Isaac is innocent in all of this, which is why I'm going to protect him from the consequences of your choices. Evan set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. I've filed for emergency custody based on your pending criminal charges. I've also filed for divorce on grounds of adultery, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. You can't do this. I'm his mother. You're a criminal. And more importantly, you never actually wanted to be a mother. You wanted to be a meal ticket. The sound of small footsteps on the stairs interrupted their confrontation. Isaac appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Mom? Dad? Why are you up so early? Evan's expression softened instantly as he knelt to Isaac's level. Hey, buddy. Mom and I were just talking about some grown-up stuff. How about we get you some breakfast? As Isaac chattered about his plans for the day, Evan caught Celia watching them with an expression he couldn't quite read. For a moment, he thought he saw genuine regret, not for being caught, but for what she was losing. The moment passed quickly. By the time Isaac finished his cereal, Celia had retreated upstairs to pack. She understood that her only chance of avoiding maximum penalties was to cooperate fully with federal investigators and accept whatever plea agreement her lawyers could negotiate. "Dad, is Mom okay?" She seemed sad. Evan looked down at the boy who had been his son in every way that mattered for 7 years. The biological connection had been a lie, but the love, the bond, the memories, those were real. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, Isaac. Big ones. But whatever happens, you and I are going to be fine. I promise. Are you and Mom getting divorced?" The directness of the question caught Evan off guard, reminding him that Isaac was more perceptive than they'd given him credit for. "Yes, we are. But that doesn't change anything between you and me. You're my son, Isaac. That's never going to change." Isaac considered this with the seriousness that had always made him seem older than his years. "Okay, can we still get ice cream sometimes?" "Every Friday," Evan promised, pulling the boy into a hug that felt like a lifeline. "Every single Friday." Chapter 7, The Reckoning. The FBI raid on Lorenzo Page's apartment yielded evidence that exceeded even Evan's expectations. Hidden among Page's belongings were documents spanning 5 years of intelligence gathering, including detailed floor plans of military facilities, personnel files, and operational schedules that had been sold to 3 different foreign contacts. But the discovery that validated Evan's strategy came in the form of a handwritten journal, Page's meticulous record of every piece of information he'd received from Celia, every dollar she'd paid him, and every future operation they'd planned together. "Your ex-wife is looking at 15 to 20 years, Sergio Devine reported during their emergency meeting. Page documented everything, apparently as insurance against being double-crossed. He never expected federal agents to find it. Evan studied the evidence laid out across the conference table, feeling no satisfaction, only a cold sense of justice finally being served. What's their legal position? Page is trying to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence, but the evidence is too overwhelming. He'll likely plead guilty to avoid a potential life sentence for treason, Beatrice explained. Celia's attorney is arguing for a plea deal based on coercion and diminished culpability. She wasn't coerced. She was a willing participant who documented her own criminal behavior. That's exactly what we'll argue. The journal entries show clear intent and planning over multiple years. This wasn't a woman manipulated into helping her lover. This was a full partner in a criminal conspiracy. The divorce proceedings moved swiftly once the criminal charges were filed. Celia's assets were frozen pending restitution for stolen funds, and her parental rights were suspended due to the ongoing federal investigation. The court granted Evan full custody of Isaac with supervised visitation for Celia, if she avoided prison, which seemed increasingly unlikely. But the most satisfying aspect of Evan's revenge was psychological rather than legal. Through Vernon's continued surveillance, he learned that Page's arrest had triggered a cascade of consequences that destroyed the man's remaining support systems. His family cut contact the moment the charges were announced, Vernon reported. His construction crew fired him to avoid being associated with a traitor. He's been evicted from his apartment and is living in his car. Good, Evan said without emotion. What about Celia? She's staying with her mother, but that's not going well either. Turns out her family had no idea about the affair or the fraud. Her mother is horrified that she used Isaac as a pawn in a criminal conspiracy. The isolation was exactly what Evan had intended. He'd learned in the military that the most effective warfare targeted not just the enemy's capabilities, but their will to fight. By systematically destroying their financial resources, personal relationships, and future prospects, he'd created a situation where surrender was the only rational option. 3 weeks after the arrests, Celia's attorney requested a private meeting. Evan agreed, curious to see how completely her position had collapsed. My client is prepared to accept full responsibility for her actions, the lawyer began, his professional demeanor barely concealing his discomfort with the case. She's willing to waive all claims to marital assets, relinquish parental rights, and testify against Mr. Page in exchange for consideration on sentencing. What kind of consideration? Beatrice asked. Minimum security facility, possibility of parole after 7 years. Evan considered the offer. 7 years would mean Isaac would be 14 when Celia was released, old enough to understand the truth of what had happened and make his own decisions about contact with his biological mother. Counteroffer, Evan said. She signs a confession detailing the full scope of the conspiracy. She relinquishes all parental rights permanently. She testifies against Page and provides full cooperation with federal investigators. In exchange, we recommend the minimum sentence under the sentencing guidelines. She'll never see Isaac again. She gave up that right when she decided to use him as a bargaining chip in her criminal enterprise. Evan's voice was steel. Take the deal or go to trial. Those are her options. The lawyer left to consult with his client. Evan knew she would accept. Celia had always been fundamentally selfish, and facing life in prison would overcome any maternal instincts she might have retained. That evening, Evan sat in Isaac's room as the boy worked on homework, the picture of normal family life restored. The past few weeks had been challenging as Isaac processed the reality of his parents' divorce, but children were remarkably resilient when given stability and honesty. Dad, will I see Mom again? Maybe someday, when you're older. But for now, it's just going to be you and me. Is that okay? Isaac looked up from his math problems with a smile that reminded Evan why biology was irrelevant. That's great, Dad. We're a good team. The best. Evan agreed, meaning every word. Chapter 8. The Final Strike. The federal courthouse in downtown Seattle buzzed with media attention as Lorenzo Page's sentencing hearing approached. News outlets had seized on the story of a disgraced former Army officer selling military secrets to foreign agents, but they didn't know the half of it. Evan sat in the gallery, watching as Page was led into the courtroom in shackles. The man looked nothing like the confident officer Evan remembered from their military days. Prison had aged him decades in a matter of months. His hair was gray, his face gaunt, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone who understood they destroyed their own life beyond redemption. Celia entered through a side door with her attorney, dressed in a conservative suit that couldn't disguise her own transformation. The vibrant woman who had once commanded attention at gallery openings was gone, replaced by someone who looked perpetually frightened. Judge Evelyn Wise, a former prosecutor known for her tough stance on national security crimes, called the court to order. Mr. Page, you've pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage, theft of classified materials, and providing aid to foreign agents. Before I impose sentence, do you have anything to say? Page stood on unsteady legs. Your Honor, I take full responsibility for my actions. I let greed and desperation override my oath to defend this country. I betrayed everything I once stood for. The words sounded rehearsed, but Evan detected genuine anguish beneath the performance. Good. He wanted Page to understand exactly what he'd lost. Mrs. Dudley, the judge continued, you've also pleaded guilty to conspiracy and theft. Your cooperation with federal investigators is noted, but your role in this conspiracy spanned 8 years and involved using your marriage to gather intelligence. What do you have to say for yourself? Celia's voice was barely audible. I have no excuse for my actions, Your Honor. I betrayed my husband, I put national security at risk, and I used my son as a pawn in my crimes. I deserve whatever sentence you impose. Judge Wise reviewed the sentencing guidelines with the methodical precision that had made her reputation. Mr. Page, the severity of your crimes and the damage to national security requires a substantial sentence. I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Page's legs buckled, and he had to be supported by his attorney. 25 years meant he would be 70 when released, if he lived that long. His life was effectively over. Mrs. Dudley, while your cooperation is noted, your crimes span nearly a decade and involved systematic betrayal of trust. I sentence you to 12 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole after 8 years. Celia began sobbing as the reality hit her. Isaac would be 19 when she was eligible for parole, a grown man who might not even remember the mother who had abandoned him for a criminal conspiracy. As the defendants were led away, Evan felt a profound sense of closure. Justice had been served, but more importantly, Isaac was protected from parents who had proven themselves capable of using him as a commodity. After the hearing, Evan met with his legal team for a final wrap-up. The civil restitution will take months to sort out, Beatrice explained, but you'll recover most of your financial losses plus damages. More importantly, Isaac's future is secure. What about Celia's family? Any chance they'll try to claim custody? None. Her mother made it clear she wants no involvement with anyone connected to the conspiracy. As far as they're concerned, Celia made her choices and has to live with the consequences. Evan nodded, satisfied. He had achieved total victory. Celia and Paige were destroyed, his assets were protected, and Isaac was his legally and permanently. But the most satisfying moment came that evening when he picked Isaac up from school. "Dad, some kids were saying stuff about Mom being in the news. Is she in trouble?" Evan had dreaded this conversation, but Isaac deserved honesty. "Yes, she is. She made some very bad choices and broke the law. She's going to prison for a long time." Isaac processed this with the resilience that continued to amaze Evan. "Will she be okay?" "She'll be safe, but she won't be part of our lives anymore." "How do you feel about that?" "Sad, I guess, but also kind of relieved. Things have been more peaceful since she left." The admission confirmed what Evan had suspected. Isaac had been aware of the tension and instability even if he couldn't articulate it. "You know what, buddy? I think we're going to be just fine. Better than fine, actually. Can we get a dog?" Evan laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd felt in months. "You know what? Yes, we can definitely get a dog." As they drove home through the Seattle streets, Evan reflected on the completeness of his victory. Lorenzo Page would spend the next quarter-century in federal prison, watching his life waste away behind bars. Celia would lose the next 12 years of her life and emerge as a convicted felon with no family, no assets, and no future. But more than their punishment, Evan had reclaimed his life and secured Isaac's future. The boy who had been his son in every way that mattered would remain his son permanently, protected from parents who had proven themselves unworthy of the privilege. It was, Evan reflected, exactly the kind of decisive victory his military training had prepared him to achieve. Complete, permanent, and utterly devastating to his enemies. The war was over. He had won. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 6 months after the sentencing, Evan stood in the backyard of their new house in Bellevue, watching Isaac play fetch with Max, the German Shepherd puppy they'd adopted from a military working dog breeder. The house was smaller than their Capitol Hill mansion, but it felt infinitely more peaceful. The decision to move had been Isaac's suggestion. "Too many bad memories," he'd said with the wisdom of someone far older than his 8 years. Evan had agreed immediately, understanding that fresh starts sometimes required new environments. Their new home sat on 2 acres of wooded land, giving Isaac space to run and explore while providing Evan with the privacy he needed for his expanded security consulting business. The federal investigation had actually enhanced his reputation. Corporations wanted to hire the man who had uncovered and stopped a major intelligence operation. "Dad, can we get another dog?" Isaac called out as Max bounded past him with a tennis ball. "Let's see how we handle one first," Evan replied, but he was already considering it. The house felt big enough for a larger family, even if it was just the 2 of them. Vernon Hoover appeared around the side of the house, carrying a 6-pack of beer and wearing his weekend barbecue uniform. "How's the new place working out?" "Better than I expected," Evan admitted. "Isaac loves the space, and I can work from home more often." They sat on the deck watching Isaac play, the comfortable silence of 2 men who had been through combat together. Vernon had been instrumental in both the investigation and the aftermath, helping Evan rebuild his business and his life. "Any word from Celia?" Vernon asked quietly. "Her attorney reached out last month. She wanted to send Isaac a birthday card from prison." Evan's expression hardened slightly. "I declined. Probably smart. Kid's doing great without her." "He is. His grades are up, he's sleeping better, and he started talking about the future again. Last week he said he wants to join the army when he grows up." Vernon chuckled, following in his old man's footsteps. The phrase hit Evan with unexpected warmth. Isaac wasn't his biological son, but he was absolutely his child in every way that mattered. The bonds forged through years of bedtime stories, scraped knees, homework help, and shared adventures were stronger than any genetic connection. "Mr. Dudley?" Isaac ran up to the deck, slightly out of breath. "Can I call you something else?" "What do you mean, buddy?" "Well, some kids at school were talking about their dads, and I realized I don't know what to call you anymore. You're not my biological dad, but you're still my dad. It's confusing." Evan felt his throat tighten with emotion. He knelt down to Isaac's level, looking directly into eyes that might not share his DNA, but definitely shared his determination. "Isaac, biology doesn't make someone a father. Being there every day makes someone a father. Loving someone unconditionally makes someone a father. Protecting someone, and helping them grow makes someone a father. By those standards, I'm absolutely your dad, and I always will be. But what if I want to call you something special? Something that's just ours? Evan considered the request, understanding that Isaac was trying to define their relationship in his own terms. What did you have in mind? Could I call you Pops? My friend Tommy calls his dad that, and I always thought it sounded cool. I would be honored to be your Pops, Evan said, pulling Isaac into a hug that felt like a promise. Vernon cleared his throat loudly. Well, this calls for a celebration. Who wants to fire up the grill? As they prepared dinner, Evan reflected on the unexpected turns his life had taken. A year ago, he believed he had the perfect family built on love and trust. The discovery of that illusion had been devastating, but the aftermath had revealed something even more valuable: unshakable certainty about what really mattered. Isaac ran past the kitchen window, Max chasing behind him, both of them laughing with pure joy. This was what Evan had really been fighting for during those dark months of investigation and legal warfare. Not revenge against those who had betrayed him, but the preservation of something precious and irreplaceable. His phone buzzed with a text from Beatrice Marshall. Final restitution check cleared. You've recovered 127% of documented losses plus interest. Justice served in full. Evan smiled and deleted the message without replying. The financial recovery was satisfying, but it was no longer the point. He had everything he needed right here. Pops, Isaac called from the backyard. Max found something in the woods. Come see. On my way. Evan called back, pocketing his phone and stepping into the golden afternoon light. As he watched Isaac excitedly show off Max's discovery of a particularly interesting stick, Evan felt the last pieces of his old anger finally dissolve. Celia and Lorenzo Page were facing the consequences of their choices, but their fate was no longer his concern. His only concern was the bright, curious boy who called him Pops and the future they would build together. The war was over. The victory was complete. But more importantly, the healing had begun. In the distance, the Seattle skyline gleamed in the afternoon sun, a reminder of the life he'd left behind. But Evan didn't look back. He was too busy planning tomorrow's adventure with his son. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section.